Hi, I'm Dan, this is at Midlife Crisis Motorcyclist, and this is of course the new Ducati Panigale V2S, a bike I am not afraid to admit I'm a little bit nervous about riding. Now, those in the know will probably be rolling their eyes at that for the fact that this new Ducati Panigale is less powerful and a bit more touchy-feely than what's gone before, and is perhaps not as manly as the real thing. But hey, it is still a Panigale. I've never ridden one before, so bear with me if I am a little bit intimidated by the idea. Now, I think this is a really interesting bike, and I think Ducati has been very brave in making it deliberately less powerful and perhaps less hardcore than the bike it replaces. And that's quite a big deal, especially for a sporting brand like Ducati, because accepted wisdom has it that whenever you launch a new bike, it has to be faster and more powerful than the old bike. But this has kind of turned things on its head a little bit and upset a few people along the way, so it seems. But credit to Ducati, if you still want a 200 horsepower plus V4 Panigale, you can still have one. What this new focus on weight saving and handling does is perhaps open up the whole Panigale thing to a much broader audience than before. Hell, you can even get one in a restricted A2 license if that's what you want. And I think this is really important. I've banged on about it on the channel before, but motorcycling desperately needs products to inspire and attract new riders, younger riders, and with this new easier going Panigale, Ducati is opening up this bike to a whole new crowd of people who might never have considered one before. Obviously it's a business, it needs to sell bikes as well, so it's tapping into a new audience there as well. Now, in terms of the kind of whole tech deep dive, I'm not going to do a kind of a walkthrough of the bike, all its features, all the electronics, all that kind of thing, how it compares to the previous V2, because I've not ridden one, so I can't really tell you. And there are people much more qualified than me to explain how it all works. Still worth going over the basics though. That is to say, it has the new 890cc 90-degree twin. That loses, of course, the desmodromic valve actuation and about 35 horsepower to the 950cc super quadra of before, so ready your pitchforks on that one. On this bike, it has about 120 horsepower and slightly lighter internals and different gearing to the Multistrada V2 that I've already ridden. This being the S version, it costs £16,995, which gets you a slightly lighter lithium battery and fancier Olin suspension, which means a nice bit of gold bling up front and a bright yellow spring sticking very prominently out of the side of the frame at the back, so everybody knows that you went for the fancier version. Ducati knows its target audience, doesn't it? Also at the back is a twin-sided swing arm. That's like we've seen on the V4 and various other Ducatis in the range. Again, it probably upsets the traditionalists who prefer the old single-sided swing arm look, but Ducati says it's functionally better in every respect. And I think it does look quite cool with those big cutouts where you can see the wheel and tyre through it. But the really interesting thing about this bike, and the thing I want to explore, is whether this new focus on less power, reduced weight, better handling actually makes for a more kind of relevant Panigale, one that's perhaps more accommodating of riders like myself with limited experience, people who might, as I say, not considered a Panigale before, whether it makes it more relevant to riding on the road, where, let's face it, a V4 with the best will in the world is quite possibly too much for anyone who even has the faintest grasp on reality or indeed their licence. Anyway, there goes the theory. Let's put it to the test. Right, so my first Panigale experience, and should I be terrified? Or is this new, friendly, accessible V2 going to look after me? Well, first impressions are that the riding position is not as extreme as I thought it would be. It's probably, I mean, I've not ridden many sports bikes, so I'm not kind of in my comfort zone on sports bikes, so it always takes a little while to adjust to the kind of the general stance of them. But this doesn't feel as extreme as perhaps what I imagine a Panigale to feel like. I think in kind of riding position, it's probably actually closer to those kind of mid-size sports bikes that I've been riding previously, like the Triumph Daytona 660, the Suzuki GSX-8R, Yamaha R7. In fact, if anything, I'd say the R7 was even more extreme than this in terms of its riding position. As you can see, the bars are not proper clip-ons, they're kind of mounted to the top yoke, so it's not a kind of race bike in that sense, although you can get clip-ons as an option apparently if you want a more racy position. But straight away, and from what I've heard, this is kind of midway between your kind of Chad Panigale and the slightly comfier Supersport. So straight away, I'm feeling a little more comfortable than I thought I would be. You know, it's not quite the kind of hands down, bum in the air kind of race bike vibe that I was expecting. So now whether that's a good thing or not will depend on your kind of previous history with Panigales. If you're coming to this from previous ones and kind of enjoying that kind of hardcore vibe that they offer, then you might think this has been dumbed down a bit, but for someone like me with kind of not a huge amount of experience on sports bikes, it's less intimidating on that score than I expected. So that's nice. And then there's the engine. We've got to talk about the engine, haven't we? That is the main event on this bike. It's got to be, it's an Italian bike. And it's really, really exciting. It's got, as you probably heard just back then, it's got quite a fruity kind of induction, especially when you're in the kind of pulling from a higher gear. But it's also got a kind of free revving zest about it as well, which is kind of what you'd expect or hope for from a, you know, sporty Italian bike. So, and it does rev to, I think, over 11,000. I think the red line's 11,350 or something like that. So it's, although it's a twin, it is revvy. It's not a screamer like a four-cylinder super sports bike, but if I hold them, you can hear it pulling. And what's really striking is just how linear the power delivery is. You know, there's no kind of sudden, you don't need to get it on cam to kind of really deliver it. It pulls from low in the revs, it's got good torque, and then that power delivery just stays flat all the way up into 5 figures. So it's really, really exploitable in that sense, and you can clip it down the gears or you can rev it out, and it is fast. There is no getting away from that. I mean, my benchmark of fast is probably, you know, it's not 200 horsepower V4 Panigales, but it's, I think the quickest bike I've ridden to date is probably the Hornet 1000, which has got more power than this, but this is definitely sporty in everything that it does. But what I think I like about this whole philosophy of this bike, this 120 horsepower output, the fact that it weighs dry 176 kilos, which I think they're claiming 17 kilos less than the previous bike, which is a chunk. So 176 dry, I don't know what that would be wet. Less than 200 anyway, and it feels so light and chuckable and playful, and also, I mean, I've not ridden any super sport bike, but it kind of in that flexibility and kind of agility, it's kind of what I imagine a kind of 600 super sports bike to feel like. But the great thing about that power output on a road like this is it feels like you're actually using not all the power perhaps, but certainly more of it than you might use on a V4 or a more powerful bike. And that's fun because it's frustrating kind of having a fast bike or car and having to kind of rein it in all the time. Way more fun being able to use 70 or 80% of the available performance than 20 or 30, isn't it? And it sounds rude as well. It's got a lovely kind of gargle on the overrun when it's hot. I don't know if you can hear that on the camera here, but when you back off the throttle, it's got a lovely kind of gurgle. So it is a charismatic engine, as you would hope. And in terms of the kind of the electronics, I think the Quickshifter is one of the best I've ever used by any stretch. You'll see me using the clutch. I like using the clutch, but the Quickshifter on this bike is just so slick. So listen to that, and then it's so good that you wonder why the likes of BMW and Yamaha are bothering to develop automated gearboxes, because it's so fast and so smooth. So it's just an absolute joy to use. As I've said before in videos, I don't usually use Quickshifters just because I like the process of changing gear, but this one is just an absolute dream. And then we get to the suspension, and I know that adds quite a bit to the price of this bike, but it's worth it. You can feel the benefits of that Öhlins suspension all the time. It's just it's there in the kind of the quality of the damping and the kind of the support. What's really surprising to me is that this bike, although it's a sporty bike, it feels really quite fluid over the road. And again, if you're going to spend money on anything on a bike, spend it on suspension, because it just, the way it just sort of floats along the road, it's actually more comfortable than you would expect of a sporty bike, just because the damping's so good. And because the damping's good, it means that the contact of the tyres to the road is absolutely consistent. So although there are lots of kind of clever systems, traction control, wheelie control, variable engine braking, all this kind of stuff, although you've got all that kind of stuff, because the damping's so good and the power is relatively modest, if those systems are intervening, I'm not feeling it. So it just turned a road like this into a fluid experience. It just links all the turns together, makes it such a flowy, fun experience. So yes, it's an expensive bike. 17 grand is a lot, and you will hear people going, oh, it's got less power, as a means of kind of talking it down. But really, it's not about how much power you've got, it's about how you use it, isn't it? And when you can use it. And like I was saying before, if you've got 200 odd horsepower, but you're only ever using 100 of it, maybe a bike like this, that is lighter and more agile and built around that kind of power output, built to make the most of it, is a more satisfying bike to, I don't know, I'll have to ride a V4 at some point and take it along this road and just compare the experience. But based on this, I think the main takeaway is just how easy this bike is to ride. I've got onto it You know, Panigale obviously is a huge name, brings with it a huge level of expectation and, yeah, fear factor, like I said at the beginning. But my main takeaway is just how fun and exploitable this bike is, even for somebody of real world abilities. So I'm afraid I can't compare it to how it goes against the old V2, but in isolation, as a road bike, it's spectacular. I love it. So there we go, I started the ride and the video talking about my fear and intimidation of riding a Panigale for the first time. How did it go? Well, you probably got the gist from the onboard, didn't you? I really, really loved riding this bike. It was just exciting, which is what you want from a bike that looks like this. It did, I will admit, it took me a little while to dial into it. You know, it's probably a couple of hours or so of riding it on twisty roads before I really felt like I was actually relaxing into it, not just a bit stiff and nervy. But once I've kind of relaxed and got a bit more confident with it, it felt absolutely fantastic. And I think what I was saying in the intro about, is this a more relevant Panigale for riding on the road, a more relevant Panigale for riders of my level? I think it probably is. I think it has nailed that particular objective, which is an interesting one, isn't it? Because that's probably also the thing that really annoys or worries the more hardcore Ducati fans who have owned lots of Panigales. You know, they've progressed through the previous V2s and things like that, and they see this one as maybe dumbing down to reach a new audience. But then, as I said, Ducati needs to sell bikes, and it needs to widen the pool of people to whom it can sell those bikes. So it totally makes sense to me. I don't have any kind of emotional tie up to the previous bike, so I'm quite lucky. I can just ride it as it is and enjoy it for what it is without that kind of emotional baggage of knowing what the previous bikes were like. Any niggles out and about? Not really. I think it's really, really confidence inspiring. I think that's the main thing that, again, for a rider of my level, I felt once I got dialed into it, I felt like I was pushing it hard. I felt like I was using all of the performance. For a couple of times I was actually using full throttle, which I didn't expect. And I certainly wouldn't be if I'd been on a V4, I don't think. There were a couple of times over crests when the bars went a bit light and there was a bit of a kind of wiggle coming through them. That freaked me out a little bit. I see there's no steering damper on this particular bike, so I don't know if that's something they might add at some point or if it's just something that bikes like this do. I don't know. I don't have any frame of reference other than those sorts of middleweight affordable sports bike which I've been previously riding on the channel. So stuff like the Suzuki GSX 8R, the Triumph Daytona 660, Yamaha R7, things like that. And that's really my kind of frame of reference before getting on a bike like this. And actually, it'd be interesting. I think almost Ducati might have laid a bit of a trap for itself in some ways by lowering the power on this bike, because if you're coming from one of those bikes and having a go on this, you might not initially think that the performance is that much better. I mean, true enough, the way it's built is way more exotic. The suspension is way fancier. The engine is a much, much more exotic, again, to use that word, power plant. Everything about it is obviously fancier than a GSX 8R or an R7, but just in terms of the way it feels on the road, maybe there's not that massive gulf that there perhaps would have been between them and the previous Panigale V2. The other bike that's kind of looming on the horizon for the Panigale V2 is, of course, the Yamaha R9, which matches it pretty closely in terms of its kind of weight and its performance and all that kind of thing, and how the quality of the suspension, all those kind of bits, its kind of track focus, and it's obviously a lot cheaper as well. So I'm very, very interested to ride the Yamaha. Thankfully, I will be very, very soon, so I'll be looking forward to bringing that video to you. But I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Has Ducati done the right thing by making the Panigale more accessible than before, or should it have stuck to its hardcore roots? Let's have a conversation in the comments. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit like. If you're not a subscriber already, please do so. And for now, I'll say goodbye, thanks for watching, and ride safe.